All right, so as I mentioned yesterday, this update that's going to be coming out is going to significantly impact a couple things, but most notably Burrow Beam. And we need to figure out if that's actually going to make a big difference in terms of its performance. And so this is what I've done. I have put together a very nice looking graph here. The actual graph part doesn't really matter, but so what we're looking at here is, yes, it's very reverse contrast. There we go. This might be slightly better. So I've got a lot of math going on with a lot of these variables, all to help us figure out what's going on with Burrow Beam specifically. So I'm going to go through each of these and tell you what all of them are for, and how we're coming to the conclusions that we're coming to. As well as, you can find the link to this graph in the description. You can mess with the sliders yourself and see what's going on. But essentially, here's a big H. This is the total HP, which is your base HP, which is this slider here. This is based on Surge, obviously, so this is relatively low HP, multiplied by 1.4, which is the pilot bonus. It gives you 40%, plus this M here, which is your hardened hull mod, which for Surge happens to max out at 57%. For other mechs, it will be lower, but for Surge, it is 57. So this is the HP that we're essentially working with. This is how much raw HP that a Burrow Beam would need to take care of, about 335,000. Well, let's scroll down to here. This M here, this is our damage per magazine. The B, this is for the Burrow Beam damage per energy, and this is that I can also mess with the energy capacity of this later. I have the E, which is the energy capacity, times 2 because you're using 2 of them, times 2 again because you're using a legendary pilot, which is 70%, plus another 30% on the damage implant. All of that multiplied by I, which is our additional implants effectiveness. So this can go from nothing and 50%, because the implants can add up to 50% magazine and then counteract that magazine bonus firing time by just using fire rate. So that's what the I is there. That's if you need to use, or if you want to use, the magazine implant. And then here's our damage per magazine per energy capacity, right? That's just a flat number. This is our energy capacity. We can mess with this later. This is, again, the implants. We can mess with this later. Here is our damage per shot, which is equal to the damage per magazine divided by 20 times I again, because you might be using a magazine implant. So if we were to mess with the I number, you notice that this doesn't move at all, and it shouldn't. The damage per shot stays the same. But we have to divide it by I because the M is also multiplied by I. So those are just a bunch of numbers. From this point, I'm going to explain what it is that I'm looking for. So I want to determine how many shots does it take to get rid of whatever type of shield that an enemy might have. That's the turning point. That's where the HP damage from a Burrow Beam would go from 30% to 100%, right? As soon as the enemy doesn't have any more shields, that's when it turns to 100%. So that specific number is important. And so that's what we have here. This is our projectile count P. This is equal to the total shield HP, which is the big S, right? This, divided by the damage per shot times 0.7, because the damage per shot on the shields is going to only be 70%. You're not going to deal full damage to the shield, you're dealing 70% damage to the shield. So essentially, how many times of 70% damage to a shield does it take before it's gone? And this is, of course, fed into a ceiling function to round it upward no matter what. If we were to take the ceiling function away, it's actually it's 10.09, which is like 10.1. So it's just above 10, but we want it to be in a ceiling function because we don't know if that last 0.1 is actually going to matter. It probably will. It will most likely count as a full extra projectile. That gives us 11, so that's 11 shots to take out the multi-layered mod shield, by the way. That's what this is. This is the perimeter multi-layer, 63%. This could be anywhere from 0, obviously, to 145% on a maxed like blockade, like a solid blockade. So now at the very bottom, we have essentially the amount of HP that is going to be left. This is the base HP, which is minus whatever amount of 30% HP you were dealing while you were taking down the shield, and then minus the full damage from the rest of the magazine that's dealing 100%. And you can see that this is a positive number right here, which means that if you were to fully mag dump a maxed Burrow Beam 12, right? That's what this is. If you were to fully mag dump a maxed Burrow Beam 12 onto an enemy with these parameters, which is, very common to see in a maxed scenario, you will end up with some amount of HP left. So you cannot do it unless you use additional implants. This is the only multiplier left that can increase your damage. So let's move this a little bit. So as we're sliding this up, you can see that number on the very bottom is slowly getting smaller up to the point where eventually it crosses into the negative. And this is where we know that we have enough damage output to kill this surge specifically. And we stopped this at 18%. So you would need 18% extra mag size, at very least, in order to destroy an enemy with these conditions. But you could still do it, and this is in one magazine, keep in mind. That's our goal. If it takes multiple magazines, the weapon's garbage. I think everyone kind of understands that. So we need to figure out what exactly are the parameters in which we can do it with just one. Let's move this to a 16, right? Let's say we want to use Burrow Beam 16. We can slide this all the way back down. You can see that we have 72,000 to damage to spare. We don't even need all of it. We don't need the mag size implant either. But let's move it back to 12. And let's go mess with these HP numbers, because that's the main thing, right? This is assuming a surge, which is a fairly weak opponent. Let's mess with some of these numbers. Actually, let's mess with the mod shield. The mod shield we can crank all the way up to 145%. Let's assume they're using a maxed legendary blockade mod. So now all the way down here, you can see that's a lot of damage that we still don't have. We can crank this implant all the way up, but even with a max legendary mag size implant, which will give you 50% more mag size, which equates to 50% more damage, you still end up not being able to kill that surge. And you can see that it would take 24 out of the what would be 30, because the base mag size is 20. If you multiply that by 50%, that would obviously be 30. So it would take 24 out of the 30 shots just to take down the shield. So you only deal 6 shots of raw HP damage. Now, this is, of course, assuming you hit them straight from the front. If you yourself are a surge, then you can just, go around to the back and deal double the damage that way. And that's when we could potentially introduce, a galvanic hull and deal with the amount of HP that you might be taking from the back. That could be absorbed by that, and then also feed that into the amount of time constraint that you as a surge have, which is about 3 seconds base plus 30%, so it's 3.9 seconds. We could do that as well, but I think for the time being, this is adequate. So we can see clearly, yeah, that's just not going to work. If you were to crank this down to 108, so this is a solid perimeter mod. Let's crank this up to 108. This is our total HP. That messes with our total HP and whatever. You can see that we're actually in the negatives here, so we're dealing more damage than we need. And we can mess with the implant here to figure out exactly how much we need. This could be margin of error type thing, so you need about a 45-ish% mag increase to be able to kill an enemy of that caliber, right? A surge with a mod of that type. But let's go look at something different. Let's take Citadel. Citadel's base HP, 323,880. 80. That's the base HP. We also need to look at the mods. The mods, obviously, on Perimeter Multilayer does not change. It is still 63%. And by the way, yeah, this says 6 layers of 10%, which is only 60%, but it's actually 10.3%, but they rounded it. But what we are looking at here is this one. So this is only 43%. On higher HP mechs, the hardened hull is not as high of a percentage, so 43% at max. So we can bring this back in. The mod here is 43, and then this is our base HP here. And then this is our mod shield, which we can... This is our mod shield, which we can crank down to 63 again. This is assuming Perimeter Multilayer maxed out. We'll go with the other shields in a little bit. But this is our total HP. We're approaching 600,000 base HP. And we're approaching 286,000 total shield HP, which is essentially the shield percentage multiplied by your HP plus your pilot, by the way, because the pilot actually does increase your mod HP, if you didn't know that. And so let's scroll all the way down here. We're still going to assume 12 energy weapon, and then everything else is as follows. So 465,000 HP is what you're going to be left with. You're going to deal very little damage to it, actually. In fact, you can see 20 of the 20 projectiles, because there's no mag implant, all 20 projectiles are going to be hitting the mod shield specifically. There's going to be no projectiles that hit for full damage on the mech itself. If we crank this up, we can see that the mag is increasing. This is still 20, so all of these successive hits are going to be dealing basically full damage. But even with a full magazine, even with implants, you're not going to be able to take down a Citadel. It's still going to have about half HP remaining. We can change this to a 16, and we will see that same deal. You actually still don't have enough damage to get rid of it. Now, this is assuming we don't mess with this A number at all. This A number right here is the ability shield, because those will also come into play. So if we were to crank this all the way up to 350,000, which is about how much max shield HP Citadel can possibly have, if its max level gets 3 enemies in its area, right, to increase its shield 3 times, plus a shield durability implant, right? So this is the absolute heftiest that a personal shield can get. Looking back down here, you see that this is 33, so it would take 33 projectiles to destroy just the shield, which is not possible. The absolute most you can get is 30. Currently, all this needs to do is be higher than this number here. So we can even drag this implant number down to about here. So all you need is 40% mag to be able to 1 mag kill a Citadel the way that Burrow Beam currently is. But after the change, doesn't matter what you do to it. You can use maxed implants, you can use 16 energy Burrow Beams. It's not going to kill it, period. It's going to leave it at a little bit extra. Now, technically, you could hit it from the back and maybe deal some amount that way, but that's like absolute best case scenario. Let's move on, though. Let's go to something else that's also very common. 227,300. So here is Deathwalker. The mod, we're assuming Perimeter Multilayer. We can keep it there. And then we'll keep scrolling down. We can see that you would indeed kill a maxed Deathwalker, but this is with 16s. So let's change that back to 12. We can see we still would kill a maxed Deathwalker with about 13,000 to spare. We can scroll down this until about here, where it's just barely in the negative, and you can see 47% mag size is what you would need, which is essentially 50%. 14 of the 30 shots would be going into the mod shield. Now, assuming, of course, that there's no mod shield involved, and this is just 0, then obviously the full damage from the mag goes into the full HP, which is like, this is what happens essentially after the first time that you send a Deathwalker back. The mod shield's gone, and it becomes easier and easier. And in this case, even if you were all the way down here and had no mag implant whatsoever, you'd still be able to 1 mag kill a Deathwalker even with the 12s. By the time this change comes around, Citadel's not going to have this modifier anymore. So this is 20% on the HP, and everything else doesn't really matter. So let's recalculate this So let's recalculate the HP in terms of what it will be when the modifier is gone. Divide that by 1.2. So 269,900. So we can put the HP back into it like that, and we end up with about 500,000 total HP, including pilots and mods. Of course, you still have a 43% on the hardened hull. No ability shield, but we'll go with a 63% maxed multi-layer. Going all the way down, you see that it would take 16 shots just to get rid of the shield itself, and then the mech would have 300,000 HP by the time you're done. This is with Burrow 12, of course. Let's crank this implant thing all the way up, just to see what would happen. You still have 94,000 left. You couldn't kill it even still. If you were to use 16s, then sure, you would be able to kill it. You'd be able to kill it even with a 30% increase on your magazine. But what would happen if your ability shield was active? I think the most common case of Citadel is going to be 123, 400, plus only one stack. So it's going to have the base shield plus one extra shield because of you who is in the area. So 170, 900. Going all the way down, this is, again, still with maxed 16s, with maxed implants for mag size to increase your damage as much as possible. You still cannot kill it with a single magazine. It's going to have not that much left, but it's enough to survive, right? 21 of your 30 projectiles are going to be primarily dealing with shields, right? Because keep in mind, when there's a shield active, this is what's important. When there's a shield active, you deal more than twice as much damage to the shield than you're dealing to the HP. It's split 70-30. Only 30% is going to HP, the other 70 is going to the shield. So yeah, you need to get rid of that shield as quickly as possible too. So more shots hitting the shield means more shots are dealing only 30% damage to HP. And this is, of course, assuming that we're using only a perimeter multi-layer, which maybe you're not. Maybe you're using a solid perimeter, which I think is, well, what's the HP on that? A solid perimeter here. For a high HP mech like this, I think for Surge it was 108. For a high HP mech like this, it's only 76. But 76 is still more than 63. So in that case, this would go up to there. And you can see that you have about a quarter of the mech's total HP left. And this is, of course, basically the worst case scenario because Citadel not only has high HP, but it also has the strongest carried shield. Like, no other mech has a shield that is nearly as strong as that, which can actually be pierced by Burrow Beam. There are other mechs with stronger shields, like Blockhorn and Aegis, right? But you can't fire through those. But I think for the sake of experimentation, what HP can a mech have? What base HP can a mech have that would be able to barely survive maxed Burrow Beam 12s without a shield? So I'm looking at the very, very bottom here. It like kind of auto scrolls it. Let me zoom out slightly so you guys can see it better. So you can see at the very bottom, it's slowly going down. Right here is where it moves. This is a base HP of 234,000. Let's go find a mech that has 234,000 HP. You. Nope, not. But Dreadnought is close, actually. Bastion has more than enough, but that's with the modifier, obviously. Vortex also has more than enough, but that's also with the modifier. 234. A brick house. A brick house could actually survive that. Not by a lot, but barely. 200 okay, Gatecrasher, no. Also, Gatecrasher could not. I think that's it. So yeah, I mean, it opens up like a couple mechs to be able to survive a full magazine of Burrow Beam 12s, even with mag size implant. I think what we're really learning here is that after the change, the mag size implant is going to be extremely, extremely necessary because it does add a lot of damage. It's mostly Citadel, but that kind of comes to no surprise because it has the heftiest carryable shield. There are, I think, a couple competitive guys that watch me. Not a lot. Obviously, I do mostly free-to-play stuff, but there's a couple competitive guys that I think still watch me. So, as far as I can tell, I mean, like, if I'm missing something major, then I would like to know about that. This video was probably very interesting for you guys, probably very boring for everyone else. But I think the TLDR from this entire thing is essentially that, yes, this change is going to seriously make some differences with Burrow Beam specifically. Now, I don't know if it's still going to be considered meta after this. That really depends on how it pertains to all these other things. There's obviously, like I mentioned, Surge would theoretically be like hitting people from the back, and that would increase the amount of damage that it deals by a bit. And maybe damage boosting mechs would even be something that is worth using, actually. It's completely possible. That's actually a good point. Let's do that right now. Hold on. Tangent number 3. I want to add a multiplier, but I'm just going to add the multiplier by way of energy. So what is 16 times... Because you have a 30% Blockhorn boost, 1.3, 20.8. Let's go down here. Let's change this to 20.8 with, of course, the mag size implant. This is going for a base HP of 269,900, which is going to be Citadel's HP by the time it's done. It's going to have a maxed out shield, or we'll say like 200-ish. You're able to deal with it. Looking at the bottom, you have damage to spare. Cranking this all the way up, even with... It's actually insane, bro. That's actually crazy. Let's bring this back up to 76 for a solid perimeter. You just barely don't. You don't have the damage output. But this is with a Blockhorn with no damage boost implant, by the way. You can add an extra 30% to this. So if we take 16, multiply it by 1.6 instead of 1.3, 25.6. We're just multiplying it by way of energy capacity because that's easier. It just automatically multiplies into everything else. 200,000 extra damage. That's crazy. So you easily deal way more than enough damage. Even with a solid perimeter, 76%. Let's go further with this. Let's say you're not using a solid perimeter, using the highest HP mod in the entire game. Solid Blockade. On a high HP mech is going to be a bit lower, 104. Yeah, for a Surge it was 145, if you recall right from the beginning of the video. This is 104. Let's make this 1.04. And so, all the way down at the bottom, you can see that you still have enough. This is assuming that you don't have, what's it called, Galvanic Hull. Because if you have a Galvanic Hull on your Citadel, then it should absorb the extra damage from the boost that Blockhorn gets. But that would only be for a little bit. Damn, now I'm like extremely curious. The Galvanic should only take effect once the shields are broken. As far as I'm aware, Galvanic doesn't take effect if you're hitting a shield and you're dealing pierce damage to a shield. It doesn't take effect. This is why, like, Tetra Rifles can deal a stupid amount of damage to an enemy without dealing any damage to a Galvanic Hull. It's because it's counted as pierced damage. It's not counted as boosted damage until the shields are gone. So this is the amount of essentially throwaway HP that it has. Let's go to this. This is our effective energy capacity with the damage boost. Large B is equal to the damage boost. This is 1.6, let's say. So in order to incorporate the Galvanic Hull into this, what we need to do is, first off, final HP is equal to the full HP minus the shield, minus whatever gets pierced from the shield, which we can just keep it as it is. Boosted damage will also get pierced through the shield at an additional rate. And then, once that's done, you also have the rest of that HP minus all of this damage output divided by the boost, because the boost doesn't count. I think we can stop here for all intensive purposes. We can stop here because an 80% Galvanic Hull on the HP is always going to exceed a 60% damage boost on a weapon. So in this case, the HP will completely deplete before the Galvanic Hull is completely destroyed, right? I tried for a minute to like figure out how to incorporate the Galvanic Hull into this equation here, but I'm having like a brain fart. I can't really do it right now. The point is, like you could tell, it's still a negative number. So this is still a negative number. This is essentially to say that a Burrow Beam 16 Blockhorn might be low-key goated. That's what I'm trying to say. Otherwise, let me know what you guys are thinking. Once again, I will have the link to this graph here specifically. I'm just going to get rid of that. I'll have the link to this graph in the description. It's going to have all of these, like, there's the graph part, doesn't really matter, but it's going to have all of these random functions in here. If you watch the video and you know what they do, then you can mess around with it and see exactly how it's going to work. Basically, everything should be on a slider that you should be able to mess with, and so this should be applicable to literally any stage of the game. It doesn't have to be max level. If you want me to make changes to it, I should be able to make changes to it that will update for you guys, and I can update this to make it easier to mess around with certain things. If that's what you want, let me know. But otherwise, yeah, that'll be it for today. There's probably like 2 people that made it to the end. Let's go. I appreciate you. But yeah, take care.